Good evening, everybody. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. First and foremost, President wants me to express his gratitude to the international and Philippine media for your hard work for covering this 50th anniversary of ASEAN and for giving the chance for citizens around the world to know what's happening here. My staff actually prepared a probably 7, 8, 9-page statement, which is basically the achievements and the outcome documents. Do you want me to read it or do you want me to just questions na lang? Dapat hindi na ako nagtanong. Okay, so again, after saying thank you and through God's grace, let me just announce that it was very successful. All of the ministers congratulated the President and myself for the Philippines chairmanship. Everyone's looking forward to November. Much has been done, and we'll give you a copy of the statements, achievements, and and some of the outcome documents. So maybe I should just answer questions.
Thank you, Secretary. May we call on Phil Star Rosell?
Obi, can I request pala, if there are follow-up questions on the same topic,
Okay, sir.
why don't you ask it right as a follow-up so that we can finish one topic then to the next?
Okay, sir. Will do, sir. Phil Star? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Rosette Adel po of PhilSAR. Just want to ask regarding the statement of North Korea that they will not put the nukes and ballistic rockets on the negotiation table. What's the Philippines' reaction to this po and the other ministers' reaction po?
Okay. First of all, any instability is bad and is wrong. No? Thank you. Why is it bad and wrong? Because you can only have peace if there's stability, and you can only have development and progress when there's peace and stability. There are situations when there is instability, yet life goes on. But there are situations when the instability is so disturbing that it affects too many areas or facets of life. And the Korean Peninsula is a worldwide concern and problem as of now, not only because their intercontinental ballistic missiles with possible nuclear weapons can hit several regions, including the United States, including ASEAN, but because their testing can lead to accidents, and it's definitely leading to escalation. As you've seen, the US and South Korea has responded by their own joint exercises. No? So the stand of ASEAN was quite clear. No? We had long meetings about this, and basically everyone and anyone, yung human nature, availability of being the peacemaker. But one by one, especially those who have close ties to North Korea, was saying, you know, how can you play peacemaker if they won't open a door or if they will not listen? If they simply want to say what they want to say, and they're not only saying it in words, but they're saying it through testing their missiles, they're not giving us any choice. That's why, although unprecedented, or although we usually wait for the ARF before we come out with a statement, we came out with a strong statement to show the world that we are with them, to show the United Nations that was going to vote on a resolution that we are with them in that we want stability to return to the Korean Peninsula. No? As you know, there are certain points that we all agreed on: denuclearization, that if it does happen, it has to be verifiable. There should be transparency. Of course, we take note that China, in one of the discussions, and other countries said that you also have to look at the security of North Korea. And the Iran deal was mentioned, that if everyone is really willing to persevere and willing to work on it, we might be able to come up with a peace deal also with North Korea. But the problem is the ASEAN member states and ASEAN as a whole saw the deadlock with North Korea refusing to give any opening. But if we made our statement one way, or we didn't give an opening for ASEAN to play a role, there might not be any other avenue for talks. So we wanted North Korea to, or the DPRK, to know that they were welcome to the ARF because it's a venue for dialogue. I was against meeting, as all of the foreign ministers agreed that we will not meet on a bilateral manner or meeting with the foreign minister of DPRK, except that they all tasked me as chair to meet him to convey two messages: to physically give him the resolution, then secondly, to explain to him that we all want peace. But if they don't open any door, or they don't give us the light at the end of the tunnel, or any options, what can we do but to support the rest of the world? So that's basically the ins and out of that issue.
Can I ask another question po? Sorry. On another matter, did
Could we
Tillerson...
take
sorry.
the questions on a similar
Okay.
topic muna? Let's
Thank
finish
you
that.
po.
Can we have CNN, please, Buena? I think he has a similar question on the DPRK.
The exchange of pleasantries with the other ministers, and you were there right beside the president. So, sir, can you tell us about what was made in that exchange, since it was also cut in the pool video?
Well, first of all, not only DPRK, to other ministers that either he knew before or first time to meet, or there's been some issues in the past. So, as you all know, ARF is basically the only regional dialogue or forum where the DPRK sends its foreign minister. So there's no other venue that you can hear him. So naturally, when the president said the pleasantries and there was a short exchange, but it's basically pleasantries. But given the fact that this is the only place and only time that they'll be able to see each other, there was some exchange. May I just take note that in April, during the Leaders Summit, President Trump, just to recall, called President Duterte if he can call President Xi Jinping of China to make representations for North Korea. So the president took that both literally and figuratively. Literally meaning he literally asked for a phone call, and he did have a conversation with President Xi. And secondly, he took it figuratively that the U.S. and other countries want to find a solution, and the president is always available to play peacemaker. But as I reported to him briefly yesterday, is that the ASEAN tried, but so far no opening. So actually the ball is in the hands of, there are two balls, no? One is in the hands of North Korea for them to give some kind of opening for discussions. The other is in the rest of the world. What do we do to prevent violence? And many in the, or conflict and violence, many in the ARF were saying, we want to prevent conflict and violence, but you cannot also prevent conflict by doing it through force. So it's sort of a, it's sort of a paradox. Kasi how do you get out their nuclear weapons without using weapons if they don't do it voluntarily? On the other hand, the US has said they will not allow them to fully develop their capabilities sa nuclear. No? So it's a very dangerous deadlock that we're all hoping and praying that can be resolved soon.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions on the DPRK? Yes. DPRK, please. Any other question?
The thought process is how the grouping decided to assign the Philippines as chair to represent the organization in meeting with Mr. Ree. And during your discussions with him, was there any mention or any allusion to how the president described the North Korean leader as some sort of a fool? Thank you.
During the last part of your question, sir.
During your meeting with Mr. Ree, was there any mention or allusion to Mr. Duterte's description of the North Korean leader as some sort of a fool?
As you know, any kind of discussion during retreats are restricted, and I cannot quote. No. Having said that, I can tell you the thought process. So we started out by a discussion first on the issue itself, on DPRK. I think three things were brought up. First was, do we do something now? Remember, we met after dinner in the first night, so that was August 4, before our plenary the next day, and then we had a lunch retreat. And it's the first time that the lunch retreat was without the senior officials and no note takers. No? So it was really a heart-to-heart, and I think it worked so well that we decided to do it every year that way. You know? Just 10 people around the table, 10 passionate members of ASEAN just talking as equals. So that was the first thing. No? What do we do? So to answer that first question, we had to say our stand regarding the issue. So we decided to have the resolution. No? Second point, which is in connection with the first, is that some member states did say that they have a relationship. Remember, North Korea has embassies in some of the ASEAN countries. And they stated that we have tried in the past to be peacemakers. We have offered them, we told them we can play the role, but they want us to listen to them. They listen to us, but they don't really listen. No? It was slightly mentioned whether or not the U.S. proposal not to allow them ARF, but we didn't really discuss it that much because, number one, the U.S. did not file it as a formal proposal. Secondly, I don't think there's a mechanism to remove someone from the dialogue at this point in time, or if there is, there's been no precedent. And a lot of members felt that, that's why there's a dialogue. You might not want to hear what that person will say about his country or another country, but let him or she say it. No? So the third part was after we agreed on the resolution, we called our senior officials to ask them to draft the language. I just made the statement that at the time my voice was already quite bad, so I told them, you tell me what to do. If you ask me, I'd rather not meet him and just give the document just so that it's very clear what our stand is. But the sentiment of the consensus, actually, it wasn't even the majority. The consensus was, no, Alan, see him not as the Philippines, but as our chair, and give him that, but explain it to them that ASEAN wants to play a productive role, but they have to give, diba? They have to budge, or they have to give us an indication, or they have to say the word or open the door. So basically, that was the thought process. So when I did meet him, basically, tatlo lang yung thesis niya. Number one, they are a friendly nation with ASEAN and with many other nations. Number two, that this is brought about by the U.S., just as you've heard, no, how he explained, and that, and basically number three, that the security of, what he used is that the Korean Peninsula situation is a complex situation, and then he just said, "You will hear my explanation later." So it was a short conversation, and there's no reference to from the North Koreans about President Duterte.
Thank you, sir. Last question on this topic, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Alden Monzon, sir, from Kyodo News. Sir, I just want to ask, where will ASEAN draw the line when it comes to the North Korean issue, sir? If they conduct more missile tests, will it consider putting forth more stringent measures, sir, instead of just issuing statements that says they are concerned about the matter?
The line has already been drawn, and the ASEAN is supportive of the UN Security Council resolution, which includes certain steps that will hopefully deny North Korea the resources to be able to continue developing nuclear weapons. So actually, even before that statement was meant as a strong message before the ARF. But even before that, individual countries, individual ASEAN states had their stand. So for example, the Philippines has continued to issue this statement, has continued to support the UN Security Council.
Okay,
Thank you, Alden. Let's move on to another topic.
No, but
sir,
we just siguro the point.
yes, sir, please.
Go ahead. When you say draw the line, and we talk beyond sanctions, that was, I was saying a while ago, it's a paradox. Because if you authorize military action, if you look at the location, what will happen to the Republic of Korea? And with the capabilities of North Korea to launch, what will happen if they do launch missiles against Japan or ASEAN countries? That's why I'm saying in a sense, it's not only a complex situation, it's also very complex how to answer it. There's sort of a paradox there. How do you get, the goal is simple, get them to denuclearize peacefully, diba? But what if they don't? So that's the big question to all of it. It's a big question to the US, big question to Japan, to ROK, to ASEAN. No? But we have to be very careful because you might think that you're helping and then it will spark a bigger conflict. That's why some states spoke out saying that they're fully supportive of the UN resolutions, but there should be no use of force in dealing with the problem because it will lead to a larger conflict.
Thank you, sir. Can we have Yuan from Xinhua, please?
I'm the reporter from Xinhua News Agency. I have a question about the ASEAN-China relationship. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, during the ASEAN-China Foreign Minister meeting, made 7 suggestions on the China-ASEAN cooperation, including seek to synergize the Belt and Road Initiative and the ASEAN Connectivity 2025, and seek to upgrade the China-ASEAN FTA. And we also noted that in the AFM joint communique, the foreign minister said the region continues to reap the fruit of China's economic growth. So my question is, how do you comment the role that China play in this region, and how do you think China-ASEAN to further the economic cooperation in the future? Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me start out by saying that we value all our dialogue partners. And let me also state that the superpowers of this world, may it be in the economic or military or both spheres, play an important role in peace and stability in any region in the world. So it's very hard to describe the role of one country in one region But definitely in terms of economics, for example, no, China has shown economic strength in what, the last 20 or more than 20 years, the last 2 decades. Its economy has also fueled growth in ASEAN. Tourism from China, manufacturing, the infrastructure projects, you know. So China has played a very positive role holistically, you know, in the region. But a couple of years ago, there was some sort of instability because of issues in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. And these instabilities, you know, caused certain reactions and strains in some relationship. The ASEAN ministers took note of the positive developments in this last year. In other words, we have to separate our overall relationship with any country and a dispute with that country. If you look at the South China Sea, the dispute is not only between China and the Philippines, China and Vietnam, China and Malaysia, China and Brunei. We have overlapping claims, but we did not allow this to disturb our good relationship with Brunei, Vietnam, and Malaysia. So that's the efforts that are underway now. You know, that all the positive sides that China can give in its relationship with ASEAN will not be disturbed because of the overlapping claims in the South China Sea. And everyone is working hard at this point in time to get there. Now, there are, of course, countries that are more passionate and use harsher language. There are countries that are as passionate but uses better language. No? But definitely, China will be a driver for socio-economic development in the region. There are other partners who also are drivers of socio-economic development. Japan is an example.
Thank you, sir. May we have Pat from Rappler?
In interviews that you were not supposed to include land reclamation and militarization in your joint communique because there was a lack of consensus. How and why did you end up mentioning land reclamation and militarization in your joint communique?
Let me start with the process. The joint communique is a negotiated document. No? So meaning you start with the zero draft, give it to everyone, then draft after draft until everyone agrees language. So there are different styles of doing it. You can go minimum, maximum, or middle. No? So our team decided to go with language that was more reflective, you know, of what was happening in the last year. Because the last document was the Vientiane document. No? And for examples, no, the concerns. You know, the difficulty with words, it sometimes that does not truly express what is happening. So like if you say concerns, is it, how much of a concern is it? Is it a lingering concern? Is it a concern that can lead to conflict or hindi, di ba? So we have to be very careful about language. And remember, the JC is about the regional interest and not only your national interest. So when the other countries were saying it's here, it's not there, they use this language, they use that language, etc., they were just referring to some drafts. And I have to admit to you, there's also a lot of gossip about it. Because when we were talking to the other foreign ministers, they were saying, they're saying this is here, they're not, they're saying this. But we had a very candid, passionate discussion. And I believe that the joint communique is a very balanced one. It articulates as close as possible how ASEAN as a whole or most or some of its members feel. But it's also a testament to our centrality. Meaning much of us compromised. Those who wanted it stronger compromised to weaker. Those who wanted it weaker compromise to make it stronger, if I may use the stronger, weaker. Although I don't think stronger or weaker is the right words. I saw some news reports about stronger, weaker, because the point is how reflective is it of the present situation. Let me just give you an example. No? If you're absent for 5 days and your editor gives you a letter saying, if you're absent, absence is inexcusable, salary deduction, if you do it again, you're out of the office. If for the next 3 months, you're never absent but you're late, of course, the document should not read absence is inexcusable. It should be tardiness is inexcusable. No? But to some, you say, sir, bakit it's weaker? Why did you tell that employee before that, absence is unexcusable? Now tardiness is discouraged. Because it's reflective, except that in this case, it's a continuing situation. But on the Philippine side, we're very optimistic. We have made several gains. If some of you were in the forum with the former secretaries Romulo, Alberto, and Albert Del Rosario, we mentioned to them that we respect and will fight for the gains of the past, but our strategy has changed. The objective is the same, but the strategy has changed. And we are very proud of the position of the Philippines now. Why? Before, our fishermen could not fish in several areas. Now there's a tentative fishing agreement. Secondly, before everyone was building everywhere. Now people are still building on what they hold, but no one's going to new areas. Land reclamations have stopped. We have agreements on the environment, on protecting marine resources. So, we can argue, and I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong as to strategy, but let's agree on the goals, and let's agree on how we will measure our success or failures in terms of meeting those goals.
Sir, quick follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
Categorically speaking, was the Philippines one of the countries that initially did not want to include land reclamation and militarization in the joint communique?
Yes, I
You were-
drafted it.
We did not want to include it.
I didn't want to include it.
Why?
It's not reflective of the present position. Well, they're not reclaiming land anymore. So why will you put it again this year? But since, yes, in fact, there was reclamations in the past, and you can start to reclaim again, and that was the general sentiment, I accepted it. So you start with a proposition. So militarization. There's militarization in the area, but there's also militarization outside. So every country has a right to defend itself. I'm not saying I agree with what China is doing. But the Philippines, in building trust and mutual respect with China, is asking China to understand us. So how can we do that without also understanding them? Having said that, we cannot compromise the freedom of navigation and oversight and overflight. We cannot compromise international law. We are signatories and believers in the UNCLOS. So I had a hand in what to put there, and I told my staff, it doesn't matter what you put or you don't put at the zero draft, because what matters is it reflects what the majority wants, and actually it's more than a majority, because if I insisted that that won't be there, there's a possibility it won't be there. There's a possibility we won't have a joint communique. Because that's the beauty, the strength and weakness of the ASEAN is the centrality, meaning we decide on consensus. It has to be 10-0. So it's a strength because so far we've found a way to vote together. But it could be a weakness because if only one of us didn't want a certain word there. But I'll just remind everyone that just because a word or a word is not in a statement or we did not make that statement in public, that doesn't mean our stand has changed, and that doesn't mean that we're not working towards that goal. Politicians and diplomats are so different. Because politicians, and I can speak for politicians being a politician for 25 years, use the microphone. And they try to gain the support for their stand. The problem is the window for negotiation closes. Diplomats are different. We try to keep quiet, we try to talk less, so that the area for negotiation and the windows and doors are more wide open.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
One more question on this topic, Christian, from ABS-CBN.
Sir, good evening.
Evening.
So regarding the conditions set by the Chinese foreign minister, was this even discussed with ASEAN? Or are you surprised about this?
Not really. I think he was just stating a fact because you cannot really negotiate. Even the framework of the COC, I mean, I don't know if I'm correct, but I'll give a lot of credit to President Duterte. Although it was an ASEAN consensus and it was negotiated with ASEAN, you know, the loud but calming voice of President Duterte in the Philippines allowed the better relations and the stability in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. So what happened? So everyone was more open to negotiations. At first, there was even a word in the framework of being non-legally binding. But at due time, China dropped that and just said, okay, let's approve the framework, then let's go now to the COC. So, you know, this isn't like conditions. If you listen to the conditions, that there must be stability, you know, there must be the status quo, etc. It's just like anyone telling you, I'll only negotiate with you if it's in good faith. Because if it's the same with us, why would we negotiate with them for the COC if they're moving? It's the same stand with the president, with the New People's Army and NDF. If you keep shooting our soldiers, why should we negotiate with you? You stop, we negotiate. So it's I look at it more as a prerequisite, and it's a logical prerequisite for me. No, that's why if you look at our statement, it's directed to all states, you know, that we shouldn't do anything in the area unilaterally and should not do anything that will make us regress and lose trust and lead to conflict.
Thank you, sir. Next
Just
question.
one follow-up. But
Sure.
sir, aren't you giving China too much, basically a free pass in these negotiations? Number one, the Philippines was the one that sought to remove or not to mention land reclamation and militarization. Because you're talking here with China,
what's your
they're the ones actually
Yes.
involved in the land
Now,
reclamation.
what's your objective? Is your objective to shame China or confront them? Or is your objective peace and stability in the South China Sea and get the COC passed? Whether the land reclamation was there or not, and it is there, the reality on the ground is that people have stopped reclaiming. And the reality on the ground is it's just not China who did reclamation. Diba? So why is it viewed as we are giving into China? This isn't a battle, this isn't a competition. China is not our enemy. Our policy is friends to all, enemy to none. So if you want us to take that attitude against China, do you mean you want us to have an aggressive attitude against Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei because they're also claiming features that we are claiming? The framing is wrong. The framing during the Aquino administration, I respect, it's Philippines versus China. Because the situation on the ground called for that. The situation now is that we're talking, we're gaining ground. So if we're gaining ground in the South China Sea, can you not reflect that in your statements so that you can get more ground? So there are some whose political objective is to shame China. So that's why their basis is it for or against China? The Department of Foreign Affairs, and I believe the ASEAN, is not for shaming any of our dialogue partners, not even for any of our rivals, not even for co-claimants, but to find a peaceful resolution to all of this. That's why, with all due respect to ABS-CBN, the online that said that we have a weaker statement, I disagree. I think that framing is the old framing of the question. And I think it's biased because it's not about a weaker or stronger statement, but it's really about is it more reflective or is it unreflective of the situation?
But basically, sir, land
Thank you,
reclamation
Christian.
is just
Go ahead,
consistent
go
with
ahead. Just let him
basically just consistent with the
Go ahead.
DOC. Although we all know that the DOC was non-binding, but
Yes.
basically you could see consistency by
So-
putting it still in the discussions now.
The question is not consistency because we consistently bring it up. It is in the stand of the Philippines that there should be no reclamation, no efforts for that. So it's not about consistency. It's about diplomatic language that will lead us to our goals. Having said that, 10 minds are better than one. So you can also ask, for example, the other states, why did they want it weaker? Why did they want it stronger? It's just that as chair, I started the zero draft. But we did not shove it down the throat of anyone because we believe in ASEAN centrality. You know? But I just wanted to emphasize, we see the South China Sea and the Philippine-China relationship much different of how it was framed in the Aquino administration.
Thank you, sir.
Hi,
we have questions.
Secretary
Hi, Ben.
Cayetano. Hello, JC Gotinga of CNN Philippines. Sir, interview with Philippine journalists at the PICC. He was asked about whether China would agree that the code of conduct be legally binding. And his answer was that just like the DOC, if the 10 states plus China have signed the document, then they have the responsibility of making, well, the contents of that document come to life. In so many words, that was what he was saying. But I just noticed that he was basically saying just like the DOC. He likens the COC to the DOC, and I think there is consensus that the DOC was not able to achieve its goal of maintaining the status quo because the massive reclamation that China carried out took place even with the DOC in place. So what do we make of this statement from Minister Wang? Does it mean that China's commitment to the COC will only be as much as the commitment that it gave to the DOC?
Okay. Take a step back now. You know, the reason why there's passion here, and I'm not saying people are not patriotic or people, when I say that there's a different framing, as I said, I very much respect the past administration. I congratulate them for their gains. I even assured Secretary Del Rosario that we will not budge in our objective to secure our national territory and not give an inch of our economic entitlement, sovereignty rights. No? But having said all of that, this is a regional organization, ASEAN, and it's a dialogue. You cannot keep seeing things from your country's point of view. Meaning, what if we were not claimants? Would we still have that same passion against China? Now, I want the non-claimants to have that passion because they're part of the ASEAN. And they want us to do that also. You know? So, it's not always ASEAN versus China, China versus ASEAN, DOC, etc. But the reality is being the strength of China, may it be economically or in other terms, some people are saying, you should join forces, sama-sama kayo, etc. But it's not that you have a claim here, you have a claim here, you have a claim here, and China is claiming everything. No, the claims are overlapping. It is true that China is claiming most of it, but the claims are overlapping. So meaning we have overlapping claims with Vietnam, with Malaysia, to a certain extent Brunei, and China. No? So to your question, do we want it legally binding? Of course, that's the ultimate goal. But what's the problem in international relations with legally binding? In our countries, we have a system. So in the Philippines, for those who are not from here, if you're from the same place, you go to the barangay first. You cannot go to the court without the barangay to certain cases. Then you go to court. If you don't believe in the decision of the court, you appeal, and then you appeal, until the decision is final. When the decision is final, or if you get an execution pending appeal, you have the people who will enforce it. Okay? When it comes to international relations, let's say North Korea is a signatory to binding agreements, to legally binding. Who will enforce it? So we want legally binding because it's better for all the claimant states. But we have to negotiate going there. So if China is saying now that they're going for binding, will we stop talking to them? Let's continue talking to them, but let's continue to push for legally binding. The problem with legally binding, very practical, I'll give you, I'm okay. I'll follow President Duterte, I'm okay till 1 a.m.
Thank you, sir.
So the problem with legally binding, is, okay, what are the penalties? And if the penalties, what are the mechanisms for adjudication? Mm-hmm. What tribunal, what court? And then after that, who will enforce? Mm-hmm. So I think some countries are just being practical by saying it's easier to have a binding rather than legally binding.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that we're going to give up on coming up with a legally binding COC.
Yes.
Now, last point. If you go back and say that, but China did this, China did that, Philippines did this, Vietnam did this, then we'll never move forward. There's no doubt that we do not like the actions of some players, including China, in the past. What we're saying is we're making progress, so we have to do better. No, but if we keep regressing, diba, in peace talks, how will we finish the peace talks if every time we talk we will say, si ganito pinatay mo, ikaw naman si ganito pinatay mo. Diba?
Yes.
If we keep going back, you go back to the past so that you don't repeat it in the future. Okay. But if you go back in the past just to scold, in the past we were strong in our statements because they wouldn't stop.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But now that there is peace and stability and there's goodwill there, that is the approach we're taking, and we think it's working.
Okay, I'm gonna pack two questions into one, so that
sure,
will keep time. Sir, of course, the ASEAN is looking after the interests of the individual members. I'm sure you would agree. So I guess what Filipinos...
And the region.
Yes. I guess what Filipinos are asking for, looking for, is the assurance that the COC will mean more than the DOC has meant. So my question number one is, so what ways are being implemented to make sure that the COC is going to count significantly more than the DOC? And number two, just for the record, sir, please pardon this question.
Go ahead.
Why not just mention the arbitration? Why not mention it?
Because we won't make any progress. China already said, if you talk about the arbitration award, there's no talks. So would you rather that we be tough on paper and shove it in their face and nothing happens in the South China Sea? Or would you rather we talk diplomatically and we get all the results? What's the guarantee of the Filipino people? What's the guarantee of the fishermen? They're now be able to fish there. What's the guarantee of future generations? Now the spawning grounds of the fish are being guarded by both coast guards. Now the giant clams and the areas with marine resources that need to be guarded are guarded by both coast guards. Now the Philippines and China are talking. Now we are cooperating and doing things together. We have a problem in Mindanao. Who gave us free guns and ammunition? So, it's not about words, about documents, about signing. Look at the actions. Look at the strength of the relationship. Look at the direction. So if you're going to tell me that, sir, there's no improvement and the situation is getting more unstable, then by all means you can ask me why not use the decision. But when we agreed with China, the president has been very clear about this many, many times. He said, he never said he abandoned the decision. He never said he's tearing it apart. So those reports that are saying that sinayang niya, that's local politics. That's people hitting the president. President said, I will put it aside first, and there will be a proper time to talk about it. But let me ask you a direct question. If I ask China fisheries, and on one hand, I refer to a document. On the other hand, I just give them a map. And I get the work done with the map versus the decision. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you use the decision or would you use the map?
Sorry, sir. I don't,
If you were in my place,
sorry, sir. I don't understand what you're driving at.
what I'm driving at is results. Ano bang gusto natin? Away o magkaayos tayo dyan sa South China Sea? Do we want to just pick a fight for the sake of picking a fight? Or do we want our interests protected in the South China Sea? So if in one way, if I'm using the decision and we're getting nowhere, versus not using a decision and using other means, other documents, other historical documents, but we're making progress, you want to go back? Because you said, excuse me, let me ask, why aren't you using the decision? Because we're following our national interest. And our national interest is to push for our claims in that area, and we're gaining ground doing it by talking in a friendly manner, building trust with China.
All right. Thank you very much. The Secretary would have to go to the lighting ceremony at CCP. He is the keynote speaker there, so...
Yeah. As long as you don't report I'm absent from there, because I'm with you, I can stay.
Sir, maybe one other
Yeah, okay.
question from another
Wang
topic.
Zhenzhen from China Central. Chinese President Xi sent a message to President Duterte, and he said that the 50th anniversary of ASEAN is an opportunity to tighten the relationship between China and ASEAN. Especially, we can create a community of shared future of mankind. So I would like to know what's your comments about this issue, and how can we deeply further the relationship between ASEAN and China step by step in the future? Thank you, sir.
First of all, I think it was a very productive and constructive dialogue and conference and meeting. I think we achieved lahat. We achieved. I was going to say lahat. We achieved everything we set out to achieve in this meeting, given the expectations. There's much more work to do. I think even the claimant states have said that peace and stability is paramount, and we recognize the positive direction that is being taken. So I could honestly say that the relationship of ASEAN and China improved and strengthened over this ministerial meetings. But let me just also state this. No? There's no shame in having good relations with any state, even if there are disagreements. So we are proud with our relationship with China. We're proud with our relationship with Japan. We're proud with our relationship with Russia. So the President Duterte is simply saying, don't tell us what to do. Take care of our individual relationship. Don't tell us what to do. Let us pursue our own national interests. Now, for the local media, it is your job, and we respect that, to hold us accountable that we are indeed producing results for the people. So my point is that the result should not be only a piece of paper or a decision. I'm not downgrading it to a piece of paper. I'm just saying you look at the situation, the factual situation in the ground. It's like another country coming up with a piece of paper that this is the number of people dead in the Philippines. But can you not look if the streets are safer? And why are they dead? Were they killed extrajudicially, or because there is a legitimate drug campaign and they fought against the police? So I think overall the relationship between ASEAN and China is improving. Philippines and China. China has close allies and friends in the individual states of ASEAN. Definitely the overlapping claims in the South China Sea has caused frictions, or in, ano ba sa English yung lamat? May lamat sa relationship. It caused a fracture in the relationship. But like young people, fractures heal. And with the right nurturing and with mutual trust, the fracture can disappear and you can be stronger. So we're looking forward to doing great things with our dialogue partners.
Thank you very much, sir.
Hindi na rin ako abot.
Secretary,
Yeah. Sorry, I'm
Hi,
just following my bosses.
sorry.
You know, you cannot negotiate with protocol officers.
Okay.
So can I stay like 30 minutes?
Sir.
Okay. Okay.
So just a related question. Having just said all that,
Please introduce yourself, please.
I'm Yan from Phoenix TV Hong Kong, and having just said all that, can I just released by U.S., Australia, and Japan on the South China Sea on the sidelines of ASEAN meetings?
Japan, Australia, and U.S. are our friends. U.S. is our treaty ally. But we have told all countries around the world, we are a sovereign nation. We will decide what is good for us, what strategy is good for us, because we are a sovereign nation. So we respect their views. But the problem of territorial dispute between China and the Philippines is between China and the Philippines. Just as China, Russia, Japan, and the other countries are not telling us what to do regarding our dispute with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and Brunei, we expect nations not to tell us what to do. But you have to understand that they also have their foreign policy and their interest. And some of these interests intersect with all of ours. For example, freedom of navigation and overflight. Everyone is for that. But we have different definitions. So, again, may I reiterate, we are not pro-China, pro-US, pro-Japan, pro-whatever. We're pro-Philippines and we're pro-ASEAN. And because we're pro-ASEAN and we're pro-Philippines, we are good friends to China, we are good friends to Japan, we are good friends to US, and we will appreciate not being told what to do because we are a sovereign nation. And that is the instructions of my president, and I serve at his pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question, please.
Good evening, sir. I'm Toru Morinaga from the Daily Manila Shimbun.
They had a very good, frank discussion with the president. It even went over time. Most of the discussion was on anti-terrorism and the support of Japan, but the president also took the opportunity to thank Prime Minister Abe for the support in anti-terrorism, for the support in Marawi, and for the infrastructure program that Japan and Philippines is working with together. You know, so it was quite a long meeting, but the meeting went along those lines.
Why it takes some long time to disclose the ALF chairman's statement? Because any different opinions over the Korean Peninsula issue or the South China Sea?
No, it's just we usually my personal style is to come out with the statement after the dialogue, not before. Even if in diplomacy, everything is talked about by the senior officials and there are all documents. I've learned in Philippine Congress that it's best to wait for the actual meeting before we come out with the documents. And since it all happened yesterday, I only had time to review it after. So we had the grand celebration. Then before that, the president met the ASEAN ministers, the dialogue partners. Then I joined him with the bilateral with Japan. And then I had 3 bilateral meetings also with New Zealand, the EU, and India. So by the time I was able to review it, it was time to go to see you. So it took me some time to.
I think there was severe discussion over the Korean Peninsula issue or South China Sea. So was it a bit difficult for you to make the statement?
Not difficult because there's unanimity, more or less, in the stand regarding DPRK. So, but it delayed because I had to get all the inputs. But I think it's very reflective. All four or five documents are very reflective of the common stand.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
Were there any progress over the East Timor as a new member of the ASEAN?
It's under consideration. Yeah, so they're filling the requirement. Yes. I just verified, but I'm there. So we told East Timor that there is support, but they have to fulfill the requirements, and they're doing everything to fulfill the requirements. So we have to go through the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think
Sure.
that ends our press conference this evening.
Thank
The
you
Secretary
again
and Chair of
very
the
much.
50th AMN, the Secretary Alan Peter S. Cayetano. Thank you,
Thank you.
friends from the media.